Imagine flipping through yellowed pages in a forgotten vault, your candle flickering against the damp stone walls, and there, inked in blood-red script, the names of children born into chains, each one a mirror image of the city's gods among men. But as the flame dances closer, you smell the char of a desperate fire. Someone tried to erase them. What divine wrath awaits those who unearth the sins of the fathers? Hold your breath, the reckoning begins now. In the sweltering haze of a New Orleans summer, where the Mississippi River whispered secrets to the levees and the Spanish moss hung like veils of forgotten mourning, Elias Hawthorne arrived not as a conqueror, but as a seeker of truths long entombed. It was 1892, the year when the ghosts of the antebellum South stirred uneasily in their graves, disturbed by the winds of change blowing from the north. Elias, a scholar from the Boston Antiquarian Society, carried with him only a leather satchel of notebooks, a magnifying glass etched with his late father's initials, and an unyielding faith in the redemptive power of history. But faith, as he would soon learn, could be a fragile shield against the abyss of human depravity. The train ride south had been a descent into another world, the iron rails clacking like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Through grimy windows, Elias watched the neat hedgerows of New England dissolve into the untamed wilderness of Virginia, then the cotton fields of Georgia, where spectral figures bent low under the sun's merciless gaze. By the time the locomotive hissed to a stop in New Orleans, the air clung to his skin like a shroud, thick with the scent of magnolia blossoms rotting in the heat, mingled with the acrid tang of river mud and distant smoke from sugar mills. The city itself unfolded before him like a faded daguerreotype, wrought iron balconies dripping with vines, gas lamps flickering against the encroaching dusk, and streets alive with the murmur of Creole voices, horse-drawn carriages splashing through puddles that reflected the bruised sky. His lodgings were on Sainton Street, in a narrow Creole cottage where the walls seemed to breathe with the humidity. The proprietress, Madame Leblanc, was a woman of indeterminate age, her face a map of wrinkles etched by time and unspoken sorrows. Her eyes, dark as the bayou at midnight, narrowed when Elias mentioned his purpose. The old courthouse records, eh? Share, you tread on hallowed ground or cursed, depending on who you ask. She poured him a cup of chicory coffee, its bitterness cutting through the sweetness of beignet dusted with powdered sugar. This city, she don't forget. But she don't forgive neither. Dig too deep, and the spirits might rise to pull you under. Elias nodded politely, attributing her words to the colorful folklore that permeated the South. He was a rational man, guided by empirical evidence and the Holy Scriptures. He carried in his breast pocket a worn Bible that had seen him through the loss of his wife to consumption 5 years prior. In its pages, he found solace in verses like Psalm 37, "The wicked shall be cut off, but those who wait upon the Lord shall inherit the earth." Little did he know how those words would echo in the chambers of his soul. The civil district courthouse loomed like a Grecian temple fallen from grace, its marble columns stained by decades of tropical rains and the soot of industrial progress. Inside, the corridors echoed with the shuffle of clerks and the distant clang of a streetcar bell filtering through open windows. The air was a palpable entity, musty with the decay of ancient paper, undercut by the faint, floral rot of mold blooming in hidden corners. Elias presented his credentials to the head clerk, a gaunt figure named Monsieur Duval, whose spectacles perched on a beak-like nose, magnifying eyes that darted like a cornered animal. The slave ledgers? From before the war? Duval's voice was a rasp, as if the words scraped against his throat. Most avoid them. Like staring into the devil's mirror. But if the society insists. He led Elias down a spiral staircase into the bowels of the building, where the light dimmed to a sepulchral glow from oil lamps mounted on wrought iron sconces. The basement archives sprawled like a labyrinth, shelves groaning under the weight of bound volumes, their spines cracked and faded, interspersed with crates overflowing with parchment that crinkled like dry leaves underfoot. Elias began his work with the precision of a surgeon, dissecting the records layer by layer. Slavery's administrative remnants were a grim liturgy, inventories listing humans alongside plows and horses, bills of sale inked with the cold calculus of commerce, manumission papers rare as acts of grace in a fallen world. The documents bore the scars of history, French elegance in early entries, Spanish formality in others, evolving into the blunt American efficiency post-1803. He noted the minutiae, ages approximated, complexions graded from ebony to mulatto in a taxonomy of exploitation, values appraised with the detachment of auctioneers. Yet, beneath the surface, Elias sensed an undercurrent, a rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of a buried sin. Marginalia appeared sporadically, cryptic initials like PR or DA, tiny symbols etched in faded ink, a crescent moon, a thorny vine, a chalice overturned. At first, he dismissed them as clerical idiosyncrasies, but as days blurred into weeks, patterns emerged like constellations in a night sky. The city outside the archives mirrored his growing unease. Mornings brought the clamor of fishmongers in the French market, their cries mingling with the tolling of St. Louis Cathedral's bells, calling the faithful to Massachusetts. Afternoons surrendered to thunderstorms that turned streets into rivers, lightning illuminating the faces of passers-by, free men of color in tailored suits, veiled women whispering prayers to saints, and ragged urchins dodging the deluge. Evenings were a symphony of sin and salvation, jazz strains leaking from Storyville's bordellos, contrasted by the sullen chants from nearby convents. Elias attended services at the cathedral, kneeling on worn stone floors, seeking divine guidance amid the incense and candlelight. "Forgive us our trespasses," he murmured, but the words felt heavier here, as if the city's collective guilt pressed upon his shoulders. It was in the fourth week, amid a stack of 1840s birth registries, that the veil began to tear. Elias's fingers, calloused from turning pages, paused on a ledger from May 1843. The volume was unremarkable at first, routine notations of infants born to enslaved mothers, their cries imagined in the silent script. But then, a cluster, 14 children, all within a 4-month window, from disparate plantations dotting the river's bend. Each entry bore an addendum, phrased with eerie consistency, infant exhibits marked similitude to esteemed individual. No names appended, but the descriptions were vivid, almost painterly: high forehead, piercing blue eyes, aristocratic bearing even in swaddling. One page showed signs of tampering, ink smudged as if erased in haste, edges singed like a heretic's tome spared from the pyre. Elias's heart thudded against his ribs, a drumbeat echoing the spiritual warfare he felt brewing. Was this mere coincidence, or a whisper from the Almighty, exposing the hidden works of darkness as Ephesians 5 verse 11 commanded? Compelled by an inner fire, Elias delved deeper, cross-referencing with ownership deeds and tax rolls. The plantations, Whispering Oaks, Shadow Bend, Eternal Harvest, belonged to pillars of society, bankers with vaults of gold, judges wielding gavels like scepters, legislators crafting laws from marble halls. He sketched maps on foolscap, pinning locations with thumbtacks borrowed from Duval's desk, lines converging like veins to the heart of New Orleans. The clerk, noticing his fervor, hovered one afternoon with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "This was misplaced in the attic," Duval muttered, his fingers trembling as he unwrapped a charred tome from 1841. "Fire in 78, they said. Accidental. But..." His voice trailed off, eyes flicking to the shadows. "Some fires are set to cleanse, others to conceal. Tread lightly, monsieur." The ledger's pages crackled like autumn leaves as Elias opened it, the scent of old smoke rising like incense from a profane altar. Half. The entries were ash, but the survivors screamed silent accusations: 19 births, scattered across estates, each annotated with numerals 1 through 9 in a hand steady as a confessor's. Child mirrors features of number 4, aquiline nose, raven locks. Elias's breath caught. This was no bureaucratic quirk but a coded confession, a ledger of lust and legacy. He spent sleepless nights in his room, the mosquito netting a ghostly veil, poring over auxiliary records by lantern light. Legislative journals from 1840 revealed inspection tours, state officials traversing plantations to evaluate moral and physical conditions under the guise of reform. Senator Lucius Beaumont, number 1, had led delegations in January, his carriage wheels churning mud on paths to Whispering Oaks and beyond. 9 months later, the births, children with his commanding stature, emerald gaze. The pattern unfurled like a serpent in Eden. Number 2, a circuit judge named Everett Thorne, whose February circuits aligned with clusters in March deliveries. Number 3, merchant Prince Silas Grant, negotiating supplies in late winter, siring shadows in autumn. Each numeral a man of God-forsaken power, their visits documented in travel logs, their sins inscribed in flesh. Elias felt a chill despite the heat, as if the breath of judgment hovered. These were not mere indiscretions but violations of divine order, echoes of David's sin with Bathsheba, where power corrupted absolutely, and the innocent paid the price. The Bible thundered in his mind: "The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished." Nahum 1 verse 3. Who had authored this cipher? A complicit registrar, perhaps, bound by loyalty or fear, encoding atrocities to preserve plausible deniability while assuaging a tormented conscience? As revelations mounted, the city's ambience shifted from exotic to ominous. Footsteps echoed behind him on cobblestone alleys, shadows lengthened under the oaks of Jackson Square, where fortune-tellers murmured of curses and crossroads. Madame LeBlanc, sensing his pallor over breakfasts of grits and pralines, shared fragments of her lineage. My grand-mère was a quadroon in the big house on Royal Street. The master, a councilman, filled the quarters with little ones who carried his chin, his laugh. The wife turned blind eyes, the church collected tithes, and the papers printed his speeches on virtue. She crossed herself, rosary beads clicking like bones. Sin don't die easy in this soil, share. It roots deep, waits for rain to bloom again. Elias pondered her words under the cathedral's vaulted ceilings, the stained glass casting kaleidoscopic judgments, saints martyred, sinners redeemed. Was this his calling, to drag these abominations into light, invoking Proverbs 28 verse 13, whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy? Emboldened, Elias expanded his search, hauling crates from dusty alcoves, his shirt sleeves stained with ink and grime. The 1830s yielded horrors. 1835, 11 notations across 5 numerals, tied to a gubernatorial commission on labor efficiency. 1837, 16 children, their descriptions evoking biblical bastards, features akin to Goliath's might, yet born in chains. The 1850s echoed the refrain, post-compromise swells of births shadowing political junkets. Sales records revealed the aftermath, some children gifted to distant kin for a nominal fee, others auctioned at inflated prices to silence whispers, a few manumitted in wills laced with guilt. Physical resemblances weren't just noted, they were weaponized, proof of paternity hidden in plain sight, a haunting legacy that mocked the elite's facades of piety. One storm-lashed night, as thunder rattled the shutters, Elias confronted the spiritual core. This was no isolated vice but a systemic sacrilege, where men played God, begetting life in bondage while preaching liberty from pulpits. The burned pages symbolized futile attempts at absolution, fire-purging paper, but not the soul's ledger. Divine retribution loomed in his visions, plagues upon houses, like Pharaoh's stubborn heart leading to firstborn's doom. Yet, glimmers of redemption flickered, perhaps in exposing this, Elias could honor the voiceless, fulfilling Isaiah 58, loose the chains of injustice, set the oppressed free. By midsummer, his notes filled volumes, a testament to iniquity's depth. The air in the archives grew heavier, as if the documents exhaled the anguish of generations. Duval, delivering yet another obscured file, whispered, "The old bloodlines still run this town. They dine in mansions built on those backs, pray in churches funded by that sweat. Uncover too much, and you'll find doors closing, or worse." Elias, undeterred, locked his findings in an iron-bound chest, walking home under a moon veiled in clouds, the river's lap a dirge for the damned. In his dreams, the children rose ethereal figures with accusing eyes, mirrors of their sires, demanding justice from the throne of heaven. This discovery was but the threshold to a vaster inferno, where the sins of the fathers visited upon the sons twisted into a coil of eternal reckoning. The city, with its masks and merriment, hid a heart of darkness, pulsing with the unresolved wails of the enslaved. Elias Hawthorne, once a mere chronicler, now stood as a reluctant prophet, his quill a sword against the veil. But as the humidity pressed in, and shadows whispered names long silenced, he wondered, could one man bear the weight of such revelation without shattering under its divine fury? As the oppressive heat of August draped New Orleans like a funeral pall, Elias Hawthorne's quest transformed from scholarly pursuit to a divine crusade against the veil of iniquity. The city's rhythm, the relentless churn of steamboats on the river, the mournful wail of clarinets from hidden courtyards, the scent of jasmine warring with the rot of the swamps, now pulsed with an undercurrent of menace, as if the very ground whispered indictments against its storied elite. Elias, his once neat collars wilted by sweat and revelation, toiled in the courthouse basement with the fervor of a prophet scribing apocalyptic visions. His Bible, open beside stacks of ledgers, served as both anchor and accusation, its verses on justice, for nothing is secret that will not be revealed, nor anything hidden that will not be known and come to light, Luke 8 verse 17, fueling his resolve amid the flickering gaslight that cast elongated shadows like accusing fingers across the stone walls. The patterns Elias uncovered multiplied like the plagues of Egypt, each new discovery a lash upon the conscience of a society built on sand. From 1836 to 1855, the coded notations persisted, a sinister arithmetic of numerals and symbols, chronicling at least 250 births, though Elias suspected the true tally ascended to the hundreds, lost to fires, floods, or deliberate obliteration. These were not random dalliances but orchestrated transgressions, shielded by a bureaucratic shroud that allowed the perpetrators to gaze upon their progeny as mere entries in a ledger, absolved by ink and denial. Why document at all? Elias pondered this in sleepless vigils, his room's ceiling fan stirring the humid air like the breath of restless spirits. The answer lurked in the symbolism, a perverse confession, a ledger of sins maintained not for repentance but for control, echoing the Pharisees' outward piety masking inner corruption. In preserving these records, the guilty clung to a twisted redemption, acknowledging their seed while consigning them to oblivion, a mockery of God's command to be fruitful and multiply twisted into dominion over the oppressed. Monsieur Duval, the clerk whose initial reluctance had thawed into quiet complicity, became Elias's unwitting ally in this unearthly excavation. No longer did Elias request files, they appeared unbidden, wrapped in faded newsprint, placed on his desk with the solemnity of sacramental offerings. Duval's hands, vein like the delta's waterways, trembled slightly as he delivered them, his eyes avoiding Elias's gaze as if fearing the judgment reflected there. One sweltering afternoon, as thunder rumbled distantly like the growl of an avenging deity, Duval lingered, his silhouette framed by the archive's arched doorway where motes of dust swirled in the slanted light from a high window. "My great-aunt served at eternal harvest," he murmured, his voice a rasp against the silence, fingers absently tracing a crack in the wooden table. "Brought in young, eyes downcast, hands raw from the fields." She spoke of the visits, men in fine coats arriving on horseback, their boots polished to mirror the sun, cloaks billowing like wings of fallen angels. He paused, the air thick with the scent of aged vellum and impending rain, his Adam's apple bobbing as if swallowing bitter gall. The women knew the signs, polished carriages at the gate, extra lamps lit in the big house, whispers among the overseers to prepare the quarters. Those chosen, they learned to detach their souls, floating above like specters while their bodies endured. And when the fruit of that violation swelled, the mistresses, pale ghosts and lace, arranged vanishings. Insolence, they'd claim, or laziness, scripting sails to far-off lands. But we called the offspring shadow heirs, visible yet unseen, haunting the halls with features that screamed paternity, echoes of the mighty in chains. Elias leaned forward, the chair creaking like bones under strain, feeling the weight of generational sin press upon him. "Why the silence?" he asked, though the answer coiled in his gut like a serpent. Duval's lips twisted bitterly. The press? Owned by the same bloodlines. Editors dined at their tables, politicians funded their ink. To print the truth was to invite ruin, lost patrons, burned presses, midnight visits from hooded figures. Better to avert eyes, like Peter denying the Christ thrice before the cock crowed. The conversation lingered in Elias's mind as he pored over newspaper archives in the courthouse's upper rooms, where sunlight filtered through grimy panes, illuminating yellowed broadsheets stacked in precarious towers. The Picayune, the Delta, the Crescent, voices of a bustling metropolis chronicling balls in opulent mansions, where crystal chandeliers twinkled like false stars, and political intrigues unfolded over brandy and cigars. Yet, amid reports of duels on misty dawns, shipping manifests laden with cotton bales stained by unseen sweat, and society columns extolling the virtues of the elite, a profound void yawned. No whispers of ghostly resemblances, no scandals erupting over light-skinned toddlers toddling through slave quarters with the noses of senators or the eyes of judges. It was a conspiracy of omission, a collective blindness ordained by power, reminiscent of the biblical hardening of Pharaoh's heart, where divine truth was obscured to perpetuate bondage. But fissures appeared to the trained eye, ephemeral articles buried on inner pages, like suppressed confessions. A terse notice from 1844 in the True Delta, uproar at Shadow Bend, bondsmen levy baseless charges against esteemed visitors. Order restored. No follow-up, no trials recorded in adjacent dockets, the incident evaporating like morning fog over the bayou. Elias traced similar phantoms, 1839, a dispute at Whispering Oaks dismissed without adjudication, 1847, unfounded allegations withdrawn under duress, the accusers vanishing into sale manifests bound for distant ports. These were not oversights but erasures, orchestrated by invisible hands, perhaps the same that pen laws from Capitol chambers, their quills dripping with the ink of hypocrisy. The silence screamed louder than any exposé, a testament to sin's entrenchment, where the powerful feasted on forbidden fruit while the tree of knowledge was pruned barren. Tormented by these revelations, Elias sought solace in the cathedral's cool nave, where candle flames danced like souls in purgatory, and the organ's notes resonated through vaulted stone like heavenly decrees. Kneeling before the altar, the scent of beeswax and frankincense enveloping him, he prayed for guidance. Lord, expose the deeds of darkness, as you did in Sodom's fall. Yet doubt crept in. Was he Job, tested by affliction, or Jonah, fleeing a divine call to confront Nineveh's wickedness? The answer arrived unbidden one stifling evening, as Elias emerged from the archives into a twilight alive with fireflies winking like errant stars. A figure awaited in the courtyard, beneath an ancient live oak whose branches twisted like tormented limbs. He was impeccably attired in a vest of muted silk, his complexion a warm ochre that spoke of blended heritages, features chiseled with an aristocratic sharpness that seemed oddly familiar. "Mr. Hawthorne," the man said, extending a gloved hand, his voice smooth as aged bourbon with a lilt of Creole French. "I am Etienne Moreau, investigator of lineages lost. Word travels in shadowed circles, you unearth what others bury." They convened at a discreet bistro in the Faubourg Marigny, where gas lamps cast golden pools on checkered tablecloths, and the aroma of gumbo simmered with spices redolent of distant shores. Moreau's eyes, keen as a confessor's, assessed Elias over steaming bowls, the clink of silverware punctuating their hushed dialogue. "Trust is a fragile vessel in this city of masks," Moreau began, unfolding a portfolio of sepia-toned daguerreotypes and meticulously inked family trees, their branches forking like veins of fate. "I seek not scandal for spectacle, but justice for the silenced." "What do you intend with these bones you exhume?" Elias, stirred by a spiritual kinship, confessed his turmoil. "These are not mere artifacts but indictments against souls. To ignore them is to abet the devil's work." Satisfied, Moreau nodded, his fingers tracing a photograph of a woman with haunting eyes. "My grandmother emerged from eternal harvest in 1845, ledger marked with striking likeness to patron number 7, none other than Governor Elias Beaumont, architect of laws that chained our kin." Moreau's narrative unfolded like a requiem, tales of shadow heirs dispersed across the South, their existence as a living reproach to their sires. He produced artifacts, faded letters smuggled in hems of dresses, diaries etched in code during stolen midnights, portraits capturing resemblances that pierced like daggers of truth. "We were commodities with inconvenient faces," he said, voice steady but laced with the tremor of inherited grief. "Sold to oblivion, some to Cuban cane fields where the sun scorched memories away, others reared in shadows, polishing the silver of half-siblings who bore the family name." Elias examined the images under the lamp's glow, the faces staring back with accusatory poise, high cheekbones echoing senators, curls mimicking merchants, all bearing the mark of Cain in their lineage. This was biblical reckoning, the sins of the fathers visiting upon generations, as Exodus warned, yet here the innocent bore the curse while the guilty prospered in marble halls. In the weeks that followed, their alliance deepened, a sacred pact against obscurity. Moreau introduced survivors, elderly figures with skin like weathered parchment, ice holding the depth of unshed oceans. There was Lucille Duvalier, a herbalist in her 60s, born at Shadow Bend in 1840, her mother banished to Jamaica mere moons after parturition. Seated in Moreau's modest parlor, amid shelves of leather-bound tomes and the scent of drying sage, she unfolded a locket containing a miniature portrait alongside a clipping of Judge Harlan Voss at a gala. "The eyes don't lie," she whispered, her voice a rustle of dry leaves. "He passed me in the market once, post-war, his carriage splashing mud on my skirts. A flicker of recognition, then aversion. Like gazing into a mirror cracked by shame." Elias felt the Holy Spirit stir within, these testimonies resurrecting the dead, fulfilling Revelation's promise that books would be opened, and the dead judged by what was written. Then came Armand Leclerc, a blacksmith whose forge echoed with the clang of hammers like judgment's gavel, tracing roots to whispering oaks. He presented manifests, his aunt, sold to Brazil in 1848, her demise falsified in logs, her true fate a voyage into exile. "She penned letters back, hidden in cargo," he recounted, unfolding brittle pages yellowed by time. "Described the ocean's roar as God's wrath, the chains as man's folly." And Therese Fontaine, custodian of clandestine chronicles, ledgers mirrored from official ones, scribed in moonlit quarters, preserving names, dates, violations. "Our ancestors knew," she intoned, her rosary clicking like beads of fate. If the masters erased us from their books, we'd inscribe ourselves in eternity's ledger. Someday, the trumpet would sound. Together, Elias and Moreau wove a tapestry of damnation, 283 documented cases from 1834 to 1856, cross-mapped to itineraries of the elite, legislative tours in winter mists, judicial rides through spring blooms, each visit seeding despair 9 months hence. But the abyss deepened with maternal fates, deaths masking exports to foreign shores, where women vanished into alien toil, their wombs evidence exiled. Sale records gleamed with deceit, prices inflated to hush bidders, manifests forged under notarial seals. This was no accident but engineered purgation, a ritual. Cleansing of sin stains, defying Proverbs' admonition, the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. As storms lashed the city, lightning fracturing the sky like divine fissures, Elias grappled with the spiritual toll. These women, vessels of life turned martyrs, evoked Mary's sorrow at the cross, innocence suffering for others' redemption. Yet where was grace here? In exposure, perhaps, Elias's work, a modern-day scroll of lamentations, calling for atonement. Moreau, too, sought not vengeance but acknowledgement, a breaking of the curse through truth's light. The alliance forged in secrecy now burned with purpose, but shadows lengthened, anonymous notes slipped under doors, warning of old debts repaid in blood. The city, complicit in its splendor, seemed to close ranks, its spires piercing heavens that watched impassively. In dreams, Elias beheld the shadow airs rising, ethereal forms in tattered linens, faces blending oppressor and oppressed, chanting psalms of retribution. Awakening in sweat-soaked sheets, the fans were mimicking their whispers. He recommitted. This was holy war against entrenched evil, where silence was complicity, and revelation the path to salvation. But as the web tightened, questions loomed: who guarded these secrets still? And what infernal forces would awaken if the veil fully tore? The reckoning, inexorable as the Mississippi's flow, drew nearer, carrying the weight of souls long denied their due. As autumn's first chill whispered through the cracks in New Orleans' ancient facades, Elias Hawthorne found himself ensnared in a web of spectral intrigue, where the past's phantoms clawed at the present with unrelenting fervor. The city, once a vibrant mosaic of gaslit streets and jasmine-scented evenings, now loomed as a labyrinth of peril, its cobblestones slick with rain that mirrored the bruised skies, its alleyways echoing with the distant toll of funeral bells from St. Louis Cemetery, where marble angels stood sentinel over graves etched with names of the mighty. Elias's hands, once steady as he turned fragile pages, now trembled with the weight of revelation, his Bible a constant companion, its leather worn from fervent grips during midnight prayers. Verses from Jeremiah haunted him: "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, but blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord." Jeremiah 17 verses 5-7. In this den of earthly powers, trust was a luxury eroded by the acid of corruption, and Elias wondered if his faith would shield him from the gathering storm. The maternal fates unveiled in the ledgers were a harrowing testament to depravity's depth, a systematic exorcism of witnesses whose very existence threatened the elite's gilded thrones. What appeared as deaths in plantation inventories were veils of deceit, women, heavy with the burden of unwanted legacies, dispatched to foreign shores under the guise of mortality. Elias traced their paths through yellowed manifests, the ink faded like ghosts' whispers, ships laden with human cargo bound for Havana's sweltering cane fields, Kingston's bustling ports, or Rio's shadowed markets. The air in the archives grew thicker with each discovery, the scent of mildew mingling with imagined sea salt and despair, as if the documents exhaled the salty tears of exile. Prices scribbled in haste spoke of desperation, inflated sums for urgent relocation, notations like witness removal scratched in margins, evoking the biblical banishment of Hagar into the wilderness, her son Ishmael a symbol of cast-off inheritance. These mothers, vessels of life turned martyrs to silence, were erased not just from records but from the fabric of family, their children left as orphans in chains, their stories severed like umbilical cords by the knife of power. Etienne Moreau, his ally in this unholy quest, leaned over a cluttered table in a dimly lit attic room they now used for clandestine meetings, the candles flamed dancing shadows across his sharp features. They weren't just victims, Moreau murmured, his voice a blade cutting through the humid night, the distant rumble of a streetcar vibrating the floorboards like an omen. They were testaments, living proof of sin's conception. To let them remain was to invite the finger of God pointing accusation. Elias nodded, his throat tight with righteous indignation, recalling Proverbs 21 verse 15, "When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous but terror to evildoers." The exiles were calculated, women sold to Cuban haciendas where Spanish overseers cracked whips under relentless sun, or Jamaican estates where the air hummed with the buzz of mosquitoes carrying fevers of forgetfulness. Some manifests bore spiritual irony, ships named Redemption or Providence, mocking the divine order they defied. Elias envisioned the scenes, tear-streaked faces on crowded decks, the ocean's roar drowning pleas, children clutched in final embraces before separation's cruel decree. This was no mere commerce but a ritual purging, akin to the Pharisees' whitewashed tombs, beautiful outward, but full of dead men's bones, Matthew 23 verse 27. By late August, their compilation swelled to 4 iron-bound trunks, hidden in scattered safe houses across the city, copies of birth entries with their cryptic numerals, sale bills stained with the ink of haste, daguerreotypes capturing uncanny resemblances like mirrors to the damned, and affidavits scrawled in trembling hands by survivors whose eyes held the abyss. The attic's wooden beams creaked underfoot, the air heavy with the tang of lamp oil and aged paper, as Elias and Moreau pored over maps veined with river routes and plantation dots. What now? Moreau pressed, his fingers drumming a requiem on the table, the sound echoing like distant thunder. Elias paced, the floorboards groaning in protest, his shadow elongated by the flickering light, evoking a prophet in exile. Publication? Exposure? But doubt gnawed at him. The family's denial would be swift as serpents, branding him a fabulist, his career crucified on the altar of Southern pride. We preserve, Elias countered, his voice firm yet laced with tremor. Like the scrolls of the ancients, hidden until the hour of reckoning. Moreau's eyes flashed with weary fire. And when is that hour? These sinners fade to dust, their heirs inheriting impunity. Is justice deferred, justice denied, as in the parable of the persistent widow? The enigma of the record's existence tormented Elias during solitary walks along the levee, where the Mississippi's muddy waters churned like the chaos of creation, steamboats' whistles piercing the dusk like calls to judgment. Why chronicle the sins if concealment was the goal? Moreau's insight struck like revelation. Leverage, my friend, the currency of the corrupt. In a city where secrets were traded like spices in the French market, the ledgers were weapons forged in discretion. Clerks, privy to the code, could wield them as daggers, a whispered threat to sway a vote in the legislature, extract favors from judges, or bleed fortunes from bankers. Elias imagined shadowed parlors, cigar smoke curling like incense to false gods, or murmurs of number three's indiscretions bent wills. This was Babylonian intrigue, where knowledge was power, echoing Daniel's interpretation of dreams that toppled kings. The records, meant for elite eyes only, preserved paternity's proof not for confession but control, a perverse inversion of the confessional, where absolution came through extortion rather than repentance. September brought the chill of pursuit, the city's warmth yielding to breezes that carried whispers of warning. Elias first sensed the watcher on a fog-shrouded morning, his boarding house's wrought iron gate clanging shut behind him as he stepped into streets veiled in mist. A figure in a slate-gray overcoat lingered across the way, hat brim low, smoke from a cigarette curling upward like a signal fire. The man reappeared at noon, shadowed against the courthouse columns, his boots echoing Elias's own. By evening, in a dimly lit cafe where brass bands played mournful tunes, the same silhouette occupied a corner table, eyes glinting like coals in the lamplight. Elias's pulse raced, a drumbeat of dread, as he confided in Moreau during a hurried rendezvous in a view-care courtyard, fountains murmuring like conspiratorial voices. They're circling, Moreau affirmed, his hand steady on Elias's shoulder, the scent of blooming night jasmine cloying in the air. Your inquiries ripple through their ponds. We adapt shadow paths, coded missives. They shifted venues, abandoned warehouses echoing with river rats' scurries, crypt-like churches where candle vigils cast holy glows on stained glass saints, their meetings punctuated by prayers for protection, invoking Psalm 91, He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Duval, the clerk whose alliance had been forged in shared silence, grew pallid, his finger tapping a frantic Morse code against his desk amid the archive's gloom. One afternoon, as rain lashed the windows like divine scourges, he drew Elias into an alcove stacked with forgotten tomes, the air redolent of leather in decay. They know, he hissed, eyes wild as a cornered animal's, the thunder outside rumbling like God's displeasure. Spies in the halls, logs of your requests. They probe your ties to me, to the descendants. Elias's breath caught, the chill seeping through his coat like fingers of fate. How? Duval's voice cracked. They approached, gold for betrayal, copies of your notes. I feigned ignorance, but my bloodline betrays me. He recounted a lineage of guardians, his grandfather, a clerk in 1850, who dared expose the code to a reformist rag, only to vanish into the bayou's embrace, his body surfacing bloated and unrecognizable, accident the official dirge. My father learned silence, preserving without proclamation. He bequeathed me the vigil, wait for the uncorruptible. Elias felt anointed yet burdened, a modern Elijah confronting Baal's priests. You're from afar, Duval urged, untethered to their webs. Carry the flame northward, where it can't be snuffed. That night, under a moon obscured by scudding clouds, Elias penned epistles to the Boston Antiquarian Society, his quill scratching like accusations on parchment. Enclosed were photographic replicas, Moreau's borrowed Kodak capturing the damning pages in stark clarity, the flash powder's acrid scent lingering like brimstone. He dispatched multiples from shadowed post offices, the stamps affixed with trembling fingers, praying for safe passage as Proverbs 10 verse 9 assured, whoever walks in integrity walks securely. Retribution swift as a viper's strike arrived not from Boston but the beast itself, a trio of emissaries at his lodging, their carriages gleaming under street lamps like chariots of the wicked. The leader, silver-maned with eyes cold as Antarctic depths, exuded patrician menace, his companions silent sentinels in tailored suits redolent of expensive tobacco. Seated in the parlor, amid lace doilies and the faint chime of a grandfather clock, they wove words like silken nooses. Mr. Hawthorne, your zeal intrigues, but misreads antiquated quirks as malice. We offer patronage, a stipend to refine your narrative, emphasizing administrative artistry over phantoms. Elias rebuffed, his voice steady as David's sling, the patterns indict numerals tying births to predators, erasures veiling atrocities. The elder's smile curdled. Speculation, sir. No chains bind numbers to names but your fancy. These souls rest, why exhume their peace? The bribe escalated, cloaked as scholarly aid, but Elias stood firm, invoking inner scripture. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Mark 8 verse 36. Veils dropped, threats emerged raw, this bayou swallows interlopers. Accidents befall the imprudent, their tales dismissed as delirium. As they departed, boots thudding on polished floors, Madame LeBlanc materialized from the shadows, her face etched with ancestral grief. Share, power devours truth. My kin learned, secrets don't shield, they summon the reaper. She recounted her grandmother's demise, whispers of paternity leading to a flight that ended in a shallow grave, investigation stifled by influence. Undaunted, Elias pressed on, his resolve a burning bush amid encroaching darkness. But barriers rose like Jericho's walls, a new overseer, corpulent and obsequious, demanding parchments for every query, delays stretching like eternity's weight. Archive sections sealed for restoration, dust motes swirling mockingly in forbidden rays. Then Duval vanished, replaced by a callow youth mumbling of resignation, his residence emptied, whispers of coerced flight to Texas's vast plains, family in tow to evade fabricated felonies. Without Duval's key, the vaults turned labyrinthine, requests lost in bureaucratic mists. A missive from Boston arrived, terse, recall imminent, funds curtailed. Elias, alone in his chamber as winds howled like banshees, knelt in prayer, the candle's guttering flame illuminating his Bible's promise, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, John 1 verse 5. Yet shadows deepened, followers multiplying, silhouettes in fog, footsteps echoing pursuit. Moreau urged flight, but Elias demurred, the cup is past, I drink. The city, a cauldron of concealed wrath, simmered toward boiling, its elite guardians rousing to defend their infernal pact. In dreams, exiled mothers rose from watery graves, their chains clanking like judgment spells, beseeching exposure. Awakening to the dawn's pale light filtering through shutters, Elias recommitted, this was no mortal skirmish but spiritual warfare, where truth's sword would cleave the veil, unleashing floods of reckoning upon the unrepentant. But as obstacles mounted, the question loomed like Golgotha's cross, could one man's faith topple empires of sin, or would the abyss claim him first? As October's golden light slanted through the live oaks, casting long, accusing shadows across New Orleans streets, Elias Hawthorne felt the city's breath quicken in relief at his impending departure. The Mississippi rolled on, indifferent, its waters carrying the silt of centuries, silt stained with the blood of the exploited, the tears of the exiled, the ink of erased names. His funding, once a steady trickle from Boston, had dried to nothing. Letters from the Antiquarian Society arrived polite yet edged with frost, urging conclusion and return. Between the lines, Elias read the invisible hand of influence, Southern donors, whispers in marble corridors, pressure exerted across state lines like a noose tightening from afar. He had weeks, perhaps a month, before recall became command. The air in his boarding house room felt heavier now, thick with the scent of chicory and impending loss, the mosquito netting swaying like a shroud in the night breeze. In those final, frantic days, Elias and Etienne Moreau worked with the urgency of men racing against divine judgment. They transformed scattered documents into a sacred archive, chronological spines of birth ledgers, cross-referenced indices mapping numerals to names, photographic plates capturing every damning page in stark, unyielding detail. Multiple copies were secreted away in damp cellars beneath Creole cottages, in locked attics overlooking the river, in hollowed-out trunks carried by trusted descendants. Even if they burned the courthouse to ash, Moreau said one rain-lashed evening, his voice steady as iron amid the drumming on the tin roof, these will endure. Proof cannot be wholly erased. Yet Elias felt the hollowness of the words. Proof of what, precisely? Atrocities half a century old, perpetrated by men now dust, their sins shielded by the grave's finality. Justice, he realized with a pang that pierced like scripture, was not the inevitable fruit of evidence. It required witnesses willing to speak. Institutions willing to listen, a society willing to repent. Here, the machinery of concealment, forged in antebellum power, tempered by post-war reconstruction, remained intact, oiled by denial and greased by influence. Elias turned his final efforts to the human heartbeat beneath the code, the individual souls the numbers had tried to reduce to shadows. In borrowed parlors lit by kerosene lamps, amid the scent of magnolia and old grief, he sat with the descendants Moreau brought forward. Marie Duvalier, her hands gnarled from decades of needlework, opened a small cedar chest that smelled of cedar in time. Inside lay fragments salvaged from Belgrove's big house, scraps of silk ribbon once tied in a mistress's hair, a tarnished button from a gentleman's waistcoat, a frayed swatch of lace hemmed by trembling fingers. My grandmother gathered these after my mother vanished, Marie whispered, her voice cracking like dry earth. Pieces of the clothes she sewed in moonlight, curtains she mended while singing hymns to keep her spirit from breaking. When they sold her away to some Cuban plantation, these were all that remained. Relics of a life erased. Elias touched the fabrics reverently, feeling the texture of loss woven into every thread, echoes of the biblical woman who anointed Jesus with costly perfume, her act preserved in memory while the powerful scheme to silence her witness. Philippe Leclerc, broad-shouldered from years at the forge, unfolded yellowed letters his grandfather had penned in the raw years after emancipation. Ink faded but intent fierce, pleas sent to distant overseers, merchants, even governors, begging for any trace of a mother soul to Texas cotton fields. He wrote until his hands bled, Philippe said, the lamplight catching the steel in his eyes. Letters returned unopened, or answered with polite lies. She became a ghost in the records, listed as deceased when the ship manifest proved otherwise. He died never knowing if she lived long enough to see freedom's promise. The word struck Elias like a lash. The sin of scattering families, of rendering mothers spectral, mirrored the separation at Babel, where tongues were confounded and kin torn asunder. Yet here the division was deliberate, a calculated cruelty cloaked in commerce. Catherine Fontaine, keeper of clandestine chronicles, spread her great-grandmother's private ledgers across the table, pages filled with meticulous script learned in stolen glances at the master's children's lessons. Births noted in margins, deaths recorded in code, sales tracked with dates and destinations. She wrote in secret, Catherine explained, her finger tracing faded ink, by candlelight in the quarters, hiding the pages beneath floorboards. She knew the official books would forget us, rewrite us as property. So she became the true archivist. For us. For the day truth might breathe again. Elias felt the weight of that hidden labor, the enslaved woman's defiance in ink, a quiet rebellion against oblivion, akin to the prophets who scribed warnings on temple walls while kings feasted in denial. On his final night, Moreau led Elias through the iron gates of St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 under a moon veiled in clouds. They passed ornate mausoleums of the elite, marble etched with virtues never fully earned, until they reached the humbler ground where simple markers leaned like weary sentinels. Wooden crosses, many nameless, rotted slowly in the perpetual damp, names weathered to illegibility. Here lie many of the ghost children, Moreau said softly, kneeling to brush leaves from a splintered board dated 1847. The ones who didn't survive infancy, or who perished young without kin to claim them. No stone, no epitaph, just earth reclaiming what power discarded. He paused beside another marker, fresher but unadorned. My mother rests here. 5 years gone. I could have afforded marble, a name carved deep. She refused. Put me with the others, she said. With those who carried the same the same secret. She never spoke his name aloud. Said silence kept the shame from defining her. But it did. It defines us still. We are the living proof of crimes polite society refuses to see. Elias knelt in the wet grass, the scent of wet earth and decaying flowers rising like incense from a profane altar. I will carry this forward, he vowed, voice thick. The records, the stories, they will not vanish. Moreau met his gaze in the moonlight. Will you speak them aloud? Or let silence win again? Elias had no certain answer. Publication invited ruin and lawsuits from descendants still wielding influence, professional exile, perhaps worse. Silence, though, was surrender, allowing the architecture of concealment to stand eternal. He departed in late October 1891, 3 heavy trunks lashed to the train, each a reliquary of anguish. New Orleans receded behind him like a dream dissolving at dawn, yet its weight clung. Back in Boston's crisp autumn, Elias attempted to birth the truth into the world. Publishers recoiled, inflammatory, unverifiable, liable to provoke. Academic journals dissected his methodology, labeling correlations speculative, connections imposed. Lawyers' letters arrived like papal bulls, threats of defamation suits against the dead, demands to cease and desist. The Antiquarian Society, under donor pressure, gently suggested refocus, administrative systems, Mr. Hawthorne. Leave the conjectures aside. When he resisted, they offered indefinite leave unpaid, unspoken ultimatum. For 5 solitary years, Elias persisted alone, savings dwindling, isolation deepening. Newspapers demurred, ancient history, no living victims, public interest minimal. Abolitionist circles, once fierce, now counseled forward motion, voting rights, economic uplift, let old wounds heal. In 1894, obituaries lauded Judge Thorne and Senator Beaumont as paragons of virtue. Elias's corrective letters vanished into editorial silence. In 1896, Moreau's letter arrived like a death knell. A contained courthouse fire had consumed the slave records section. Arson whispers, he wrote. Your copies are all that remain. If they perish, the story dies. Elias spent weeks in a rented warehouse on Boston's edge, fireproof cabinets gleaming under bare bulbs, reorganizing everything into one inviolable archive, originals, photographs, testimonies, his own exhaustive analysis. In quiet ceremony, he donated it to the Antiquarian Society with ironclad instructions, sealed for 50 years, until 1946, when the implicated bloodlines might have faded, when America could bear the mirror held to its past. He died in 1903, heart-weary but faith intact, believing time would vindicate truth. Yet archives are capricious sepulchres. Renovations in 1910 scattered boxes, relocations in 1923 buried them deeper. Depression-era reorganizations entombed them in obscurity. By 1946, when the seal expired, institutional memory had faded. Dusty crates sat unlabeled, their contents illegible to new generations, codes without keys, faces without names. In 1978, a graduate student researching bureaucratic evolution pried open the archive. Weeks of study revealed the pattern: numerals, births clustered 9 months after official visits, maternal deaths masking exile, testimonies echoing like psalms of lament. She presented her findings, pulse racing with discovery. Her advisor examined the materials, then closed the lids with finality. Dynamite, he said. But circumstantial. Numbers, not confessions. Publish, and your career ignites, then burns. Heart heavy, she complied, resealing the boxes, redirecting her work to safer ground. The archive waits still, in climate-controlled storage at the Massachusetts Historical Society, a silent witness to unacknowledged sin. No reckoning came. No headlines shattered the calm. The implicated families, some still prominent, others dispersed, maintained legacies built on unexamined foundations. Descendants of the Ghost Children Walk Among Us features bearing silent testimony, many unaware of the bloodline that chains them to forgotten crimes. This is no tale of triumph. Truth was documented with meticulous care, preserved against erasure, yet smothered by the greater force, power's refusal to look. The mothers sold into exile, the children scattered like chaff, the families rent asunder. These were not accidents of history but deliberate acts, coded and concealed, protected by consensus not to see. Perhaps one day a researcher, unburdened by fear, will demand the boxes be opened. Perhaps patterns will connect, stories will surface, and the ghost children's faces will stare back from yellowed photographs, demanding acknowledgement. Perhaps newspapers long complicit will finally print what they once ignored. But power protects power. Silence outlasts stone. And some iniquities, documented so thoroughly they could never be denied, are hidden most effectively by collective refusal to remember. What remains is the echo of Elias Hawthorne's unanswered prayer, that truth, though buried, might yet rise like Lazarus from the tomb. Until then, the ledgers lie closed, the relics untouched, the graves unmarked. And in the quiet of old southern cities, secrets sleep on waiting, perhaps forever, for someone brave enough to wake them.